Opportunities in the Marketplace by Victor Yap and Doris Monk. Chapter 9. Deborah, A Woman's Place. Judges chapter 4. 11 people were hanging on a rope under a helicopter, 10 men and 1 woman. The rope was not strong enough to carry them all, so they decided that one had to leave, because otherwise they were all going to fall. They weren't able to choose that person until the woman gave a very touching speech. The woman said that she would voluntarily let go of the rope because, as a woman, she was used to giving up everything for her husband and kids or for men in general, and was used to always making sacrifices with little in return. As soon as she finished her speech, all the men started clapping. Guess what happened? The story of Deborah is not a forum or statement on biblical equality, a proof text for and a biblical defense of feminism in the Bible, or a theological treatise on the role of women in the church or pastoral ministry. It was about a woman who used her testimony, gifts, and skills faithfully and selflessly, dedicated more than 40 years of her life in consistent service to God. Judges 5:31, her country and her people. Unrest, oppression, and suffering were at its peak when Deborah arrived on the scene. The oppression, verse 3, and Exodus 3, verse 9, the Israelites suffered was an uncanny resemblance to their suffering in Egypt, a situation unheard of when the first 2 judges, Othniel and Ehud, Judges 3, were around. What good is a woman in a male-dominated society and ministry? What role has a godly woman today? How can a woman excel in service to God? First, be fervent in service. Judges 4, 1-5. After Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, a king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Because he had 900 iron chariots and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came to her to have the disputes decided. One of the most remarkable imitations of a handyman I have seen was done by a homemaker, May, who painstakingly restored the church sign that was ravaged by strong winds. She already had her hands full with a 7-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son at the time, but she was determined to save the sign and save the church the estimated $2,500 in repair. We were ready to pay professionals for the job when she insisted. I had asked her when she volunteered, "Are you sure?" The church vice president gave a detailed email account of what May had done with the encouragement of her husband. First, the sign had to be sanded to rid the wooden board of old paint chips. Several coatings of white paint were then given to each side of the sign. They have to wait for one side of the paint to dry before proceeding to the other side. Later, they traced the Chinese characters over the sign and hand-painted the Chinese characters on both sides of the sign using a tiny brush. Additionally, each side of the sign has a straight-lined border in blue. They've ordered 2 pieces of plexiglass to protect each side of the sign, a feature that was missing from the original sign. All these were done while the house underwent major renovation due to water damages caused by broken water mains and pipes. I might also add that the couple had a mild panic when rain fell while they were drying the paint on the board. The fascinating thing was that May was a restaurant and hotel management major who had audited the church accounts as a volunteer, and she took on the job of restoring the church sign while most people hardly thought about doing so. Many years after the job, she testified that the salvage job she did gave her the confidence to repair and remodel many things in the house by herself. Deborah was an incredible woman who was adept at multitasking. a wife, a prophetess, and a judge. She did not hide her gifts, hide behind the family, or play hide and seek when things were not right, when hearts were troubled and enemies were threatening. The Israelites were oppressed by the Egyptians, Exodus 3:9, and the Amorites, previously Judges 1:34, but for the first time they were cruelly, mightily oppressed, verse 3. The oppressors were the Canaanites, who were renowned for their iron chariots, Joshua 17:18. Not that she was out to prove herself or distinguish herself as a woman, but she could not wait for a man, another prophet, or another generation to rise and take her place. She had to be the person God meant her to be. There were no ifs, buts, and whys. She multiplied the gifts she had, did all in her ability and everything in her capacity to serve God. The word leading in verse 4 is judged in Hebrew. She had to cope with the busy day, the packed schedule, the prying public and ministry, a horde of people and a slew of issues and non-issues every day. Besides that, she had to manage the home, lead the country, and keep both separate. The stress women face today is nothing new, nothing to crow about, and nothing compared to what Deborah had to face, carry, and endure. God, however, is good, and His grace is always sufficient. He equips, supplies, and assures us when He calls us into service, men or women. Deborah was a capable woman. She did good quality work. Her workplace was often flooded with calls, visitors, and activities. She was busy as a bee, and her hands were always full. People kept asking, coming, and pleading. Their problem was her problem. She had the greatest honor among all the judges. People loved her. They respected her teaching, advice, and judgment. She had insight, skill, and compassion in settling disputes, dispensing counsel, and upholding justice. They came to her for their problems in the family, with the office, and with the law. The people did not always like what they hear, but they always accepted, trusted, and respected what she said. Deborah had her work cut out for her. She did not just rule, she judged. The only woman in a male-dominated society and job. She had to put her foot down, make an unpopular decision, disappoint people, but not let them down, follow her head and not her heart, rule for the sake of everyone and not one or some or self. Second, be faithful in service, Judges 4:6-10. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kedesh in Naphtali, and said to him, The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, Go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead the way to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, and his chariots, and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands. Barak said to her, If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. Very well, Deborah said, I will go with you, but because of the way you are going about this, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh, where he summoned Zebulun and Naphtali. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. A salesman got lost on a side road, so he stopped to ask directions from a ragged and barefoot man sitting in front of his desolated house. After receiving the information he needed, the salesman asked, How is your cotton coming on? Ain't got none, replied the farmer. The traveler continued, Did you plant any? To this the man responded, Nope, afraid of boll weevils, which are beetles that infest cotton plants. The curious visitor then asked, How is your corn doing? To which the man equipped, Didn't plant none. Afraid there wasn't going to be any rain. Undaunted, the stranger made still another inquiry. How are your potatoes? Again the reply came, Ain't got none. Scare of potato bugs. Somewhat puzzled, the salesman made one final inquiry. Really? What did you plant? The answer was, Nothin'. I just played it safe. God's chosen woman has to do above and beyond the call of duty. Barak was a man who shirked his duty. He wanted to play it safe, cover the angles, and involve more people. His appeasing reply, verse 8, to Deborah actually cut her down, let her down, and put her down in an unkind way. Deborah was unique and unlike other judges. She was the only acknowledged prophet or prophetess in the period of the judges. No peer was her equal. She gave the word instead of receiving the word. Unlike other judges, the prophetess did not have the help of the Spirit of the Lord. Judges 3:10, 6:34, 11:29, and 13:25, or the angel of the Lord. Judges 2:1, 5:23, 6:11, 13:3. But she was given the precious ministry of the word, which she did not take or give lightly. Death threatened the prophets who spoke presumptuously or vainly in God's name. Deuteronomy 18:20-22. Further, God had not spoken directly to Israel as a nation through a prophet for over 100 years. Judges 3:8, 2:11, 2:13, and 3:30. And Canaan had cruelly oppressed and terrorized the Israelites for 20 years. Judges 4:2-3. The last prophet was Moses. Deuteronomy 34:10, and the last prophetess was Miriam. Exodus 15:20. Deborah not only had many hats to wear, she had many people trying to tell her how to do her job. When the word of prophecy came through Deborah in the form of the imperative go, come, verse 6, Barak could either go or not go, but his answer was, I will go if you go. I will not go if you would not. It was a yes and no, yes if, or yes but answer, which was not an option God had given him. Deborah saw through Barak's reply. She was not touched, impressed, or delighted by his request. In fact, she felt manipulated and trapped and rejected in the worst way. He did not thank her or raise questions, but turned it down in a nice way. Barak's confidence in her presence, but not her word of assurance at war, was a ploy. He wanted out and was hoping that Deborah would back out too. His passive and aggressive response did not work. The issue at hand was personal obedience, not joint action. Obedience cannot be co-opted, co-joined, co-executed, co-produced, or co-sponsored with another person, not any person for that matter. Barak's half-hearted obedience was 50% compliance. He was wary of the enemy's power and was not convinced of outright victory, undermining the morale of the army and making Deborah's company, power, and support the critical factor and not God's. Deborah went anyway, doing above and beyond the call of duty. She had sent for Barak, issued the ultimatum, and proclaimed the victory, but abruptly canceling the plan, dropping the issue, and doing something else were not her options. Her handicap was obvious. She was not skilled in warfare or trained in battle. It was insensitive and outrageous of Barak to quit in a time of crisis when war was looming, people were uneasy, and guidance was needed. Deborah should be flattered, but she was not. Her place should be with the civilians and Barak's should be with the army, but he ducked for cover, passed the buck, and diverted the attention. She had done her job, but now she also was doing Barak's job for him. Third, be fearless in service. Judges 4:17-22. Sisera, however, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there were friendly relations between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the clan of Heber and Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she put a covering over him. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say, 'No.'" But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Finally, God's chosen woman has to do what she has to do. A minister who is a widow and a mother of two had lunch with me. Before we departed, she asked me what I thought of women in ministry. She has a Bible college degree and 25 years of pastoral experience, but she was thrust into ministry by the untimely death of her husband when the children were elementary students. The church was kind enough to retain her in her husband's place. She did the best she knew how, the best she could under the circumstances, the best she could with 2 young kids. Caring for 2 kids and shepherding a church at the same time for an extended period of time was almost an impossible task, but she has done it for more than a decade on her own. She shared that people take a woman lightly and do not give them as much leeway and respect as they give men in ministry, which I totally agreed with her. She even suspected that the church had offered the job to her out of sympathy for her plight. Then she asked me point blank, "What do you think of women in the ministry?" Without much thought, I gave my 2 cents worth. Don't think so much. If God has given you the opportunity, just serve Him faithfully whenever the opportunity is there. She called me a few days later and thanked me. What did I do? I asked. She said that my practical advice had helped her to have a more positive attitude. She said she will remember my advice. As long as God gives me the opportunity, I will do my best. The 3 stories of Deborah, Barak, and Jael are linked in an interesting way of telling people and the position they held and the part they played. The first has position and part in the victory. The second has position but no part. The third, Jael, has no position but played a big part. Jael was a woman of incredible strength, means, and resolve. Killing Sisera was not the highlight of the story, but putting 2 and 2 together, taking matters into her own hands and deciding things on her own were the point. She was knowledgeable of current events, independent in thought and wise in her ways. Jael was, however, not always that way. She and her husband used to live in the city, but they moved to the countryside to avoid further conflict with his tribe and clan. There, in the thick of the woods, the outsiders learned how to survive and thrive on their own. She had learned to make adjustments, find food, and even defend herself, especially when they were in alien land, when her husband was not always by her side, and when family ties were strained. This time, Jael was caught in a situation similar to many instances in the past. She did not curse her luck, ask for permission, or seek for approval. The housewife had to do what she had to do with what she had at hand and what her hands were dealt, but she used her brains and her mouth before her hands. The decision was not easy. She could not harbor a fugitive enemy, turn an acquaintance away, verse 17, or consult her husband, who was away. It was a scary, spunky, and sturdy job for any woman or man, for that matter. Jael urged Sisera twice in the imperative to turn in, verse 18, then took a hammer in her hand, and went softly unto him, and smote the nail into his temples, and fastened it into the ground, verse 21 in King James Version. In a way, Jael's task and call were not more different or doable from Deborah's because her imperative, come, verse 22, is alike Deborah's, go, verse 6 imperative in Hebrew. Some scholars decry Jael's use of violence and treachery, but her actions were not the spur-of-the-moment decisions. It was not an emotional decision, an impulsive decision, or even a controversial decision. For the first time in the new land, things were so desperate that the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Verse 3. The only other time Israel had cried to the Lord was when they suffered oppression in Egypt. Exodus 14:10, Numbers 20:16, Deuteronomy 26:7. The nation was in a sharp decline, in a sorry state, and in a big mess. The new generation was facing what the past generation had experienced. Things had reached a critical point and a new low. The situation was unbearable because of the might, cruelty, and onslaught of the Canaanites for 20 long years and counting. From being oppressed, Judges 1:34 and 2:18, the Israelites were now mightily oppressed, Judges 4:3. Conclusion. Where is a woman's place? A woman's place is in the home, the church, and the workplace, where she uses her gifts, skills, and life to serve and honor God to the best of her ability. Diamonds are not a girl's best friend. Beauty is only skin deep, but behind every successful man is a relational, responsible, and resourceful woman. Do not strive for recognition, success, and power. Cultivate knowledge, wisdom, and skill. Are you waiting hand and foot on the men of the house to act, the men in church to work, and the old boys' club to weaken? Have you asked God to empower and embolden you to act? Women do not need the final say, but they can and should take most things into their own hands when necessary. Bible study questions. Judges chapter 4. 1. How did the Israelites behave after they arrived in the promised land? How would you describe the king of the land? Verses 1 to 2. 2. Who were the enemies of Israel? How did they treat the Israelites? How did the Israelites respond? Verse 3. 3. Who was Deborah? What did she do? How was she different from other judges? How did the Israelites respond to her? Verses 4 to 5. 4. What did Deborah command Barak to do? How did Barak respond to Deborah? What did Deborah predict? Verses 6 to 9. 5. Was the army of Barak or Sisera stronger? 10 to 14. What was the result of this battle? Verses 15 to 16. 6. What did it cost Jael to kill Sisera? Verses 17 to 21. 7. Please compare Deborah and Jael, especially their status in life. What contribution did Deborah and Jael make in their own way to subdue the enemies of the Israelites? Verse 23. Application. 1. Have you dealt with the expectation of others? Family, children, superiors, subordinates, friends, on you. How do you solve the problem? Do you agree with their wishes? What prevents you from doing what they want? 2. In the face of the powers of the world, how do we rely on God's protection and bravely and honestly face the assault? 3. How are believers in the world to watch, prepare themselves, and wait for the Lord to work? Give 3 true examples. 4. In what way do we need God's help? How can we help each other and bear fruit together? 5. Meditation. May the Lord enable me to appreciate men and women because what you have done in us is wonderful. How intricate is the way you have complimented them. Please make me fulfill my identity as a daughter and fulfill my duty as a girl so that I can fulfill the Lord's will where He placed me. May the Lord encourage me to love Him more and know how to pursue His word and His will and to seek more for heavenly blessings and grace. 6. How has this lesson helped you as a disciple of Christ to understand your role, identity, participation, influence, and relationship with others in the marketplace?